When Helldivers 2 launched, it seemed like it was destined for greatness. The game's mix of intense co-op action, beautiful landscapes, and satire humor captured the attention of gamers worldwide. The game also blew up on social media, which helped increase the player count. However, as months passed, the buzz surrounding Helldivers 2 decreased to the point where the player base now is roughly 15% of what the peak of Helldivers 2 once was. Also, people almost never talk about the game anymore, versus back then, when the game was fresh, people would non-stop talk about it. So it makes you wonder, what went wrong with Helldivers 2? I compiled a list of things that I believe played a part into the downfall of Helldivers 2. So just getting started, number one is the lack of content and replayability. One of the biggest complaints from the community was the lack of content after the initial release. While the game's core mechanics were polished and engaging, the missions and objective quickly became repetitive. Many players noted that the environment felt too similar with little variety in objectives or enemy types. Unlike other successful co-op games that consistently updated their content with new missions, weapons, or events, Helldivers 2 suffered from the little content to keep players playing their game. The developers released updates and patches, but they were more focused on bug fixes and balance tweaks rather than substantial new content. For a game heavily relying on co-op play, this lack of fresh experiences made it hard to maintain a dedicated player base. Also, the first update did not help at all, since a lot of people were mad that they nerfed the meta setup. If you played Helldivers 2, you know what I'm talking about. But they nerfed it, which made the game harder, which angered a lot of people for some reason, even though for me, I kind of liked it. Reason number two is the Sony account linking controversy. If you know, you know. If you don't know, I'm about to tell you. One of the most notorious F-ups in Helldivers 2, and what put the nail in the coffin, was Sony's requirement for PC players to link their accounts with the PlayStation Network. Basically, you would have to make a PSN account like you have a PS5, even though you're playing on PC. While this might have seemed like a minor inconvenience to some, it sparked widespread backlash within the gaming community. Many players felt that this requirement was unnecessary, and it didn't make sense at all, if I'm being honest, especially because in some countries the PlayStation Network doesn't even work, so they won't be able to play the game that they already bought and that they were able to play before. Forcing players to create and link accounts for a system that they don't even use angered a lot of players to the point that they deleted the game and never returned. Social media platforms were quickly flooded with complaints expressing their anger and resentment towards the new requirement. While Sony eventually reversed this decision, allowing players to access the game without a PSN account, the damage had already been done. By the time the policy changed, many players had already uninstalled the game, and a lot of them just didn't return. Now, if I'm being honest, this was all Sony's fault, and it was unfortunate because in the end, the only people that suffered the most were the developers of Helldivers 2, because this was entirely out of their control. And reason number three is the gaming industry in general. The decline of Helldivers 2 also reflects a broader trend in today's gaming culture, which I believe needs to be changed. But players nowadays have short attention spans, which I believe social media does play a part. In today's market, new games are released at such a rapid pace, and players are quick to move on from one game to the next big game. Social media and streaming services also emphasize this phenomenon by constantly highlighting new games, making older ones feel outdated in just a short amount of time. It almost feels like how people hop from one trend to another in social media. But for Helldivers 2, this meant that even players who initially enjoyed the game were quick to abandon it once another hyped up game release capturing their attention. This cycle is a challenge for developers across the industry, as it's increasingly difficult to retain a dedicated player base in such a competitive environment. You can get a glimpse of this by just thinking of the trends in gaming in 2024. I mean, people started the year off with Power World, which quickly switched to Helldivers 2, which quickly switched to X-Defiant, which quickly switched to Chain Together. I mean, you get the idea, but notice how nobody really plays those games anymore or even talks about it. Why is that? Well, because video games life cycles are so short nowadays. Why? Because people's attention spans are so short nowadays, and that needs to change. Now, for my next question, or maybe a question that you have while watching this video, is Helldivers 2 even worth playing almost a year later? Well, almost a year after its release, Helldivers 2 has seen some improvements. Developers have rolled out updates addressing community feedbacks, including new maps, missions, and new enemies. So for players who are looking for an online co-op game to play with friends, then Helldivers 2 is definitely worth playing. However, if you're just a solo queuer or a solo player, then I don't know if this game is worth it. I think the enjoyment of Helldivers 2 is the fact that you could play with others or play with your friends, and although I haven't experienced this, I have heard that sometimes it's hard to queue up in the lobby with other people because there's little players in the server. So if you do decide to get it, then I would recommend looking into Facebook groups, Reddit communities, or Discord servers to see if you could find other people to play with so it's not just you by yourself. And also, I will say this game does get repetitive and stale after a while because you do essentially do the same missions over and over, and after you reach a certain level, it kind of feels like you're not really working towards anything and you're just passing time, if that makes sense. Now, I do think this is a good game to play. I mean, the quality is there. It's just the game is only good for a short period of time. I'll probably continue to play this game, but only if my friends suggest it. I will probably never hop on it on my own. But Helldivers 2 serves as a warning or an example for developers in the gaming industry. While the game's initial release captured the attention of a wide audience, its inability to sustain player engagement led to a sharp decline in popularity. A combination of limited content, technical issues, and poor retention strategies all contributed to its downfall, which you kind of see more and more in games as time continues to move forward. It's not just Helldivers 2. So as the gaming industry continues to evolve, developers must adapt to changing players' expectations. For games to thrive in this generation, they need consistent updates, strong community support, and features that encourage long-term engagement. But the game's story reflects a broader trend in gaming, and it's the limited nature of popularity and the challenges of keeping players invested in this oversaturated market.